This is B. Nicole from Buried on the Tundra, and you're listening to Pods Like Us.
Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Linden Cole, who is the creator and narrator for the fabulous The Icarus Complex. Hey Linden, thanks for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for a show that I can't stop listening to.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
So, what was the inspiration behind the story?
So, I would say this dates back to when I was at university. One of my lecturers, I'd just performed a comedy sketch, and she advised me to take the character on a bit of a tour at the time. But in my personal opinion, now I don't think it was a very good character at the time. So, I then transformed that character into more of a comedy stand-up routine, which then transformed into a screenwriting thing, which again, I wasn't really clear on screen direction and stuff like that. I was obviously quite young and naive back then. And then when I moved back to London, I used to have to work in the centre of London in, where was I working at the time? Moorgate. I used to be an hour's journey on the train. So I just decided to try and write something on my journeys on the way in. So on my iPhone, I would sit and write what you now know as chapters or episodes. And the idea was to turn it into a book. But, it was a book, but it was named something else originally. It was named Confessions of a Narcissist initially. And then following giving it to some publishers, it wasn't finished. So they obviously sent me away and said, finish it. But then obviously life gets in the way. And then the pandemic hit. So I obviously spent some time trying to finish it off. And then here we are. So it's now become the Icarus Complex and in podcast form.
That's great. But the way that you've structured it, it's easy to take what's there and then eventually, hopefully, I'm guessing, getting it actually published in novel form.
Yes, but I think that I would rather see this in a more of a visual medium now rather than an actual written one. I think once it's gone out in the podcast or in the audio way, I think it might lose its, because I think the essence of what I'm trying to do is try and make it as immersive as possible. Obviously, with the narration as it is, it's not quite enough to bring the character, in my opinion, to life and all the other characters. So I feel like if it's in a visual medium or an audio medium, it kind of makes it a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, I can see that. But when I listen to it as well, and I listen to the narration and what's going on, I can almost picture the actual scenes playing out in my head visually as well. So the descriptive side to the writing is fabulous. Thank
you very much. The character itself is, well, it's semi-autobiographical. I can say that much at least without getting anybody into trouble. But it's loosely based on obviously my growing up throughout London, and obviously some episodes of Friends and Friends of Friends throughout university. So because of that, obviously I can recall instances quite well. I'm the sort of person where I can give you a story that happened last week and remember it piece by piece. So I kind of feel like that adds to the reason why I'm able to detail in such specific ways what somebody did at the time and how they looked, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you actually get inspired to go into the world of podcasting?
So I would say about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, a friend of mine and I created a podcast called The Blurds, which is stands for Black Nerds. We just put the words blurds together. It was a really bad idea at the time. I'm ashamed to even admit that, to be honest with you now. And it wasn't very good. And we used to record it in my kitchen on my iPhone, and then also I'd spend the best part of a day or so trying to edit it. I think we tried to be too controversial at the time, and I was a bit worried about how it would come across. So I think we only lasted about 6 episodes, and rightly so, I might add there. And then after that, I just kind of just decided I wasn't going to do anything. But I think the pandemic has kind of forced my hand a little bit, only because obviously I'm a creative person, and the idea of an audiobook, which is what I wanted to be in the first place, was okay, but I didn't think I could do that without having the backing of a publisher as such. So obviously podcasters obviously means that I've got full control over what is said and how it's done, so I can do it in my own time. So that's the reason why I chose the podcast.
But I think in a way then the lockdown and the COVID situation has actually brought a positive then. So how you were looking at it originally, I think it's actually made it better to make it into a podcast and make it into an interactive medium, should we say?
100%. But initially what I wanted to do was have it as an ebook. So there's instances of text message interactions between the central character and somebody else, and I wanted to have those appear on screen as if the texts were coming through at the time of being read, but it got too complicated to do. So I think now, as you rightly said, it probably is a better idea to do it in the medium that's currently in.
But it's I mean, you know, only to use it's not really the same thing exactly, but it's a bit like some films, for instance, accidents or things that you don't expect can make
course.
things come out a bit come out as they're supposed to, and it makes it more creative in a sense. A bit like, you know, I'm using the old adage of the shark in Jaws. It's a much better film it's a much better film for not seeing the shark as much.
Correct.
And
100%.
You know, so it by accident it makes art better.
Yeah, because I spent I was working at home at the time, so I spent a lot of obviously time. My house is obviously my rest time, obviously my working place, and I found myself not being able to. There's only so much piano you can play and gym you can do right at one time, so I had to try and find other ways of trying to keep the brain active. And actually, again, as you rightly said, it was a complete accident. I was literally bored one afternoon, and I just started to record what I'd written onto a phone just to see how it would sound if it was in audiobook form. And I kind of felt like, oh, this sounds okay. So let me see if I can try and make something of it. And to be honest with you, the first few chapters kind of proves that I didn't really know what I was doing. I was doing some of the character voices myself.
Yeah.
Even the female ones, which it wasn't a very good idea. And I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do later on in the seasons when there was a lot more dialogue. So I used to have to tune up a lot of the pitches were changed by myself through the editing software that I have, and it sounded okay at the beginning, but I got to a point where I said, no, I need to be able to, if I'm going to do this properly, I need to have the right people doing this. So.
But you made those changes really quickly, because within I mean, already I think I got up to to chapter 8.
Oh wow!
I think I got up to last night. I got through 3 chapters, intended to get through 5, I'll be honest. And or was I intending to get through 6 and get to the end of season 1, I think. Yeah, I would have been. But even then, by chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, thereabouts, you've already got like female voices playing the females, and you've got different people doing different voices already. So you've already very quickly gone from that initial stage to having a full-on cast, shall we say?
Yes, and I had to, because I'm quite a stickler in some of the things that I do. I'm not a perfectionist by any means, but this to me is obviously a personal project. So obviously, at the very least, I need to be able to enjoy doing it. And if I can listen back to it in years to come and say, well, I've at least succeeded in something, then that will be good. No, you're right. Obviously, I record them week to week. So by, I'd say, episode 3 or 4, well, by 5 even, sorry, I realized that that's the 5th weekend. And I was getting more and more comfortable with doing it. But like I said, doing the female voices was just causing me so much trouble. And then when I realized that maybe accents were possibly needed, and it's not really my strong point, accents,
Yep.
I had to make a decision. And actually, a friend of mine, he recommended to me a freelance service called Fiverr.
Okay.
And that's where I found, I've been auditioning and trying to find freelance voice actors for various roles. It can be quite troublesome because I might put an ad out there, for example, for let's say I need someone between 20 and 25 from Birmingham, female. And then for some reason I get barraged with a bunch of men trying to, who wanting to take part in my ad, or take part in the story, sorry, which doesn't really help. So I have to sift through a lot of the rubbish to get through to what I need. um, and then sometimes at the beginning, I don't want to sound mean, but it's quite expensive. Obviously, I need to be able to pay these people for their time, and rightly so. But sometimes people charge, for example, £25 for 100 words, which if you've got, it can add up. So I was then trying to find, and the lowest you can probably pay is £3.90 for 25 words, for example. So I thought, well, let me go for the £3 odd words for 25 words, but then the quality sometimes isn't always the best. And then I feel quite bad to be able to say, oh, do you mind doing that again? Which I don't really want to do. So it's a fine line between paying for quality and just trying to see, well, if you're trying to cut corners. And initially I was cutting corners because I didn't think it would go as far as it had. I had one lady doing a 20-year-old as well as a 40-year-old, and you can clearly hear the distinction in the voice. And I was like, okay, that's not really a good idea. So I need to be able to bridge or show the distinction between ages without having to try and have one person do all the voices for me.
Yeah, it's a shame these days that we can't get like a modern day or female version of Mel Blanc, who used to do all the Warner Brothers voices back in the day.
Exactly. But I do appreciate it. So everyone that's helped me out with this has been very helpful. I've had no real instances of any devious behavior or anything like that. It's just all been a lot of fun, and I'm happy to direct people. Now I'm beginning to see a more of a producing side of this for me now. As much as I might narrate it and do obviously the voice for the main character, it's actually the editing side of it for me, and bringing everyone together is what I'm finding most enjoyable.
It's great. But actually, thinking about voice actors, you've also got people like, I'm going off on a tangent here. People like, The Simpsons is famous for having people who do multiple voices.
Yes.
But somehow or another, they just seem to be very different and get away with sounding different each time.
I think it's a matter of practice. And again, like I said, back at the start, I didn't know what to ask for. And I think now I'm into my 3rd season. And I've just finished, obviously, doing auditions for those characters. And I've been able to now ask ahead, are you able to do different character voices? And obviously have them send me their show reels so I can make a decision as to whether I want to use them for more than one person. And it does make things a little bit easier. And it obviously then you then have a relationship with that individual that you're working with. They're reliable, and the quality of work is obviously top notch as well, in my opinion, for them. So,
absolutely. And I mean, I was talking with Pat from Podcastagram, and we were both saying how the actual sounds that you use and the music that you use in the background and the whole feel and the recording that you do is just top rate. We were both talking about it yesterday, actually. We were both saying
thank you. I know
to each
Pat.
other that we think it's great.
Pat. Small world podcasting. The sounds. If I said to you that I don't have any idea about what sounds I'm going to use, I might read it. So it takes me about a day and a half to record literally all of the content. So, for example, yesterday's one I recorded is only a 25-minute episode in its entirety,
Yeah.
but it took about 4 hours to record. And that's because obviously I've got to stop, start, and redo certain takes and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I don't really have any idea about the sounds as such as I'm recording it. It's only when I'm listening back to it and putting it in entirety that I then have an idea for a sound to put in there. I've had to obviously get a license for sound effects. I
Okay.
use something called Epidemic Sound. And then also as well YouTube for some things that are quite obscure I can't actually find. So obviously I have the ability to download from YouTube and use those. But as you know, downloading sounds can obviously be quite a touchy subject when it comes to licensing. So I also have to be careful with what I use.
It can. So you don't do any of your own Foley work then?
I have started to do now. Yes, I have had to. Because certain things certain things I can't find, like maybe a fall down the stairs, which I would recommend anybody not to do for yourself. It's not a really good idea.
Have a
Sometimes
microphone at the bottom of the stairs and just
yeah,
throw a
yeah,
ball
no,
down there.
I mean, I know it now, but at the time I wasn't really thinking that far ahead.
Okay.
But thank you for that. I'll bear that in mind for next time. Stuff like drinking sounds, stuff like that. So yeah, stuff I can't find, or I want looking for a particular sound, and yeah, I would do myself.
So with a fantastic, I'm going to say now, with the fantastic vomiting sounds, were they found online, or did you make those yourself?
No, they were found online.
Right.
They were found. That's actually one of my favorite chapters. Actually, I don't know why. I'm not really a coarse person like that, and I listened back to it recently, and I thought, well, this is quite vulgar, but it was just it was a lot of fun for me to sit listening to different vomit sounds on YouTube and the ones I can use. I'm not really a sort of vomit person. I don't even know why I just said that, but no, it's when you do realize what you're willing to put up with sometimes when you have to go through certain situations like this. And vomit for me is not something that I like listening to, but I did want to put across the point that we've all had a situation where we've drunk too much. We all know what it's like to have that feeling of throwing up. So I thought, yeah, let me just make it as realistic as I possibly can.
And quite often it happens when you were younger as well.
And when you least expect it sometimes as well, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you got any
memories.
Have you got any memories of your own?
If I'm being honest, I was a bit of a difficult person in my late teens.
Okay.
So when I was actually even mid-teens. So when I was 16, 17, which, I admit it's illegal. You're not supposed to, but, I'd drink. And drink didn't really agree with me, a bit like the character in your show in a way. Drink really didn't probably agree with me, but it was to sort of like, I used it to sort of like try and forget what was going on around me because I wasn't in a great place at the time. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't the best thing for me either because when I got too drunk, so I would actually vomit quite a bit, and it made me a bit angry as well. And luckily, I can control drinking a lot more, but easier now. I don't drink quite as much as I did when I was in my teens, but so yes, I do have some not so good memories of.
No, I understand that, and that's one of the things from the character that obviously I can see. I understand what you're saying there. That's one of the obviously I'm quite the same in that particular sense. I am the same. I'm not a drinker at all. It's not something I've ever. I started very late, and only because I went to university, so I kind of had to play catch up, as they say. But when you don't know how to handle your drink, as they say, it can have a lasting effect on you in some respects, and this happens with the character quite a few times. Is that it's I think he means well, but sometimes the environment or that obviously again the alcohol sometimes can just send someone's emotions from one extreme to the other. So yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind a drink now and again now, but but back then I was a bit crazy. It's almost probably a bit like a peer pressure thing as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I get that.
Same as drugs, I might say.
Yes, and that's something that's thing is I the drug side of it, and obviously I don't really want to give anything away for anyone's listening to it, so it's all and for yourself. I don't think there's anything within this particular character that is off limits in terms of what he goes through. Like I said, some of it is from a personal standpoint, but a lot of it is much of a it's just to the extreme. But there are people out there that are obviously trying to show that they do go things through like this. Especially at a young age, it can have a lasting effect on them. And without the support or the network to be able to help them through these situations or allow them or give them the platform to be able to express their emotions, because men don't really have a way of expressing their emotions very well, as we all know.
Yes.
So, yeah, this was my way of just giving us, well, I say us, but giving men a voice for those that want to be able to say that, look, I need help, or I've needed help, or this is why I am the way I am, and hopefully give other people the means of understanding that they're not alone in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, this is Greg at Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to Pods Like Us with Marv, and down with monarchy.
I mean, I listened to it, and I mean, like you've hinted at, I've only got so far as I have, but there's a certain thing about it where I listen to it, and I think it's an important story in a way, because it's showing people that, this person's just like you are in this way. They've gone through this. We know that you're going through this. You're doing this. You're doing whatever. This is happening with you in your life, but it's happened with other people in their lives, but they've been able to move on from that situation, and
Sure.
And they've learned from those situations, in some ways eventually, because there's a lot of times where you do things like the drinking, for instance, where you don't learn straight away, and it takes time for you to realize and go, well, you know what, perhaps restructuring and whatever, and that. So there's the positivity there that there is something past that hurdle.
Yeah, that key saying, I think in my head as I was writing this, was learn. I forgot how it goes. It's do as I say, not do as I do.
Yeah,
that's the one. So that's always been, and rather than me being dictatorial about it, I mean to say, just learn from my mistakes. Don't fall, or learn from the character's mistakes. So I don't necessarily feel you need to do things because everyone else is doing them, and that's very much what this person does. It gets to a point where things sometimes they escalate beyond control.
Yeah.
But it's only recently somebody reached out to me on Instagram to say that one of the particular episodes that they resonated with them because they were going through a similar situation, and that to me was extremely humbling, because if it means that there are people out there who can find solace or find some sort of just help with hearing that something that they may be going through, that they feel is they're the only person, and that isn't by at all to diminish what they're going through. It's just more of just helping them through whatever they may be going through, with examples that to say, yeah, look, you're not alone in this situation, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, as much as hard as it may be.
Yeah, because I like to think that in a way, I think mistakes or things that happen to you that are not so positive in life can actually make you the person that you become in a positive way as well, because those things teach you where you don't want to go in a way. So that makes you stronger in a sense as a person.
Yes. But I will say, again, without giving things away, I do feel like this particular character doesn't always learn from his mistakes.
Well, yeah, already found
that. There is hopefully a character arc in this, and that's hopefully how I've written it. But I don't know. There's a thing. so for example, this particular character wasn't initially very sought after by females at a younger age, and it may have probably been the right thing to do. Obviously, we're young; we shouldn't really be involved in that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
I think once he got older and then obviously started to get more attention, kind of went to the character's head a little bit, as the title is, the Icarus Complex, and obviously all it is just a matter of every situation the character gets himself into is one that he could have potentially not got himself into, but insisted upon, as they say, flying too close to the sun.
Yeah.
And then obviously we have situations. So I'm hoping at some point the character does find, well, I won't give that away, but does find some retribution for the things that he's done, but also some accountability is taken for some of the stuff he's gone through.
Yeah, in a sense, he's going sort of over the top into a situation where he needs to be a bit more laid back.
Yes,
and that's the problem with the Icarus thing. He's going too far close to it, whereas he could be a bit further down and sort of like hover almost at a better level and coast essentially.
But is that not sometimes obviously in hindsight it's a wonderful thing, right? So is that not sometimes that to me sometimes is a male attribute, although it's not necessarily everyone, and it's quite stereotypical to say that, but I do feel like we all have that element of us sometimes in our youth where we feel like we know what we're doing, we know what's best, and sometimes decisions are really based on impulse. And because I think this person means extremely well, but sometimes impulsive decisions can end up hurting other people. And when you haven't got any consideration for other people, which at sometimes this character does not, I will admit, that impulsive decision has a domino effect on everything else. So,
I mean, he has good intentions quite a few times actually during the story so far. For instance, when he the Christmas at the parents of the girlfriend's house. I mean, his good intentions there are that he's trying to ingratiate himself with the family.
Yeah.
To make himself better with the family, but in that process of doing that, he's distanced himself or is shown a problem for the girlfriend because she thinks, oh, this is going too fast. And essentially she wanted him to go to her parents to take that. But then in essence, it went somewhere that she didn't expect. And she suddenly realized, hold on a minute. In a sense, if she'd have thought about it, she took it there and she should have said, now, perhaps we ought to hold back a bit and that. But in a sense, I don't think in that case, he actually did anything wrong in there. I think it was her pushing the situation too far and not reading the relationship correctly.
You can be the first on exclusive on this, Marv. That story is actually a true story. That one is actually, that chapter there is actually something that I did experience myself as a youthful person. And as you rightly said, in hindsight, look, there's two sides to every story, and I had my part to play in that downfall. I should have probably realized that it wasn't a good idea going.
Yep.
But as you rightly said, it could have been handled differently. Differently, and I didn't know what I was doing. Obviously, it was too soon, too quick. Put it that way. But that was the reason why I put that story in there, because that was the first example for me of a breakup that happened via text.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've all. I don't want to say we've all been through that. I don't know, but it was that first example of someone not having the necessary respect to have a conversation with you, especially as one of your first relationships. It can kind of put a damper on things going forward, and you can get a little bit, well, I wouldn't say hard-hearted, but apprehensive going forward. So, yeah, that was an example of of how breakups can be sometimes difficult when you're not informed as to why things have gone wrong. And even to this day, I still don't really know why. But I mean, I do know why it went wrong because it's years ago now. But at the time, it was something I didn't really know how to articulate to myself. So, yes, I do remember that one very well.
But yeah, I shouldn't really keep the wound open, should I?
No, it's fine, no problem at all.
But it must be heart wrenching because of the fact that you've had such a closeness and intimacy with each other in relationship wise, and then it's almost like matter of fact finished. There's no intimacy there. It's I don't know how to explain it. It's
No, I know what you mean.
It's like there's no actual. It lacks feeling in a sense.
Yeah.
It being done that way.
But unfortunately, that is again, I don't want to sound callous, but unfortunately that is what breakups are. Obviously I try to maintain as much relationship with people that, even friends, or even not even just relationships with females or whatever. I try to maintain as much as I possibly can, but sometimes people need that break. They just need to have that separation from you completely. And if that means not talking to you after that or finding their ways of ending things, unfortunately, that is what you've got to do. And as much as it might hurt the individual going through it, everyone has a way of dealing with things. And I've come to realize that now. But yeah, the character does not. So yeah, it just keeps trying harder and harder to. Yeah,
we won't give away how he responds.
Of course,
for those people that haven't listened to it yet. But then again, I mean, staying on that thread, I suppose the other way of actually doing it in person to person can be incredibly painful as well.
Yes, and I would say that the idea for this for me was supposed to be. So what it was, one initial reason why I started to write this, I saw, I think it was Mary Claire magazine. I was at work and a lady and it was 10 things that your man likes, something like that. And I read it and it was written by a woman. And I'm not to say that some of the things she said weren't true, but I thought, well, surely it should be, surely men should know what 10 things that men want, or things that we do for or things that we do and why we do them. So that was one of the reasons and inspirations for me writing this. Secondly was Adrian Mole. That was one of my favorite books as a child. That's obviously very highly inspirational for me towards this. And I would say Bridget Jones, but I would say some of her episodes and things that she goes through in the comedic sense was another reason why I wrote this. So in terms of the person to person, I think we all have people in our lives that we want to be able to say sorry to, or just try and find explanation as to why things happen, or at least have a conversation with them just to say, well, look, this happened because of this, and this is my way of giving a voice to people who want to do that or want to have the means of doing that, and to say, well, if you have that idea in your head, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because obviously not everybody wants to be reached out to, but this is more of a, I wouldn't say a love letter to those people because it would mean that that character's in love with them still. It's more just of a accountability letter to them. And it can be painful because there are some people in there who are personal to me that that may or may not ever get a chance to hear this. But all the feelings that are in there, they're genuine. It has been tough. It has been tough in some respects, I must admit.
But you're using your own life as inspiration for art, essentially. So, I mean, it's going to be that way.
Yes. But what I don't want to do is, I'll give you an example. So when I first wrote this, there was a friend of mine at university, female, and when it was in this book form, I asked her to read it, and she read it, and then we fell out because of the character in the book, because she just didn't like the character, and I was just a bit worried that people will, or like I said, although it is semi-autobiographical, I'm still have a little bit of a doubt sometimes that people may feel like all of this is me. It isn't at all, but what I don't want to do is the character to be completely hated. You're not supposed to necessarily like the character at times,
Okay.
but certainly not fall out with somebody over it, because that's not at all what I intended. But yeah, no, you said it can open some wounds on some things, but I'm hoping that when people listen to it, they have, and at the end of it, they go through as much of an emotional roller coaster as the character, not necessarily in the same ways, but I'm hoping towards the end there is some sympathy and some understanding that yes, he has brought some things on by himself, but circumstance and environment and just the luck of the draw sometimes is just, we're not all lucky. We don't always have the opportunity to have everything that we want. And when you do have those things, how do you keep those things without losing it, without going to your head? So that's the premise.
Well, I'm guessing that what you've written into the story isn't all 100% exactly as. I'd sort of guess that you're using it as inspiration, and then things change accordingly. Shall we say poetic license, essentially?
Yes, I would say that. I said I think if anybody, like, I listen to it now sometimes, obviously when I'm reviewing it, and I think anybody who goes through some of the stuff that this person's got in the entirety that it has would probably be I'd love to have a chat with this. If this person was a real person, I'd love to have a chat with them and just ask them how you've managed to survive through all of this some of this stuff, because it can be quite harrowing in some respects. But it would take a patience of a saint to be able to go through some of this stuff. But as you rightly said, it's not there. Yeah, so there are elements in there. What can I say as an example? In terms of, like, for example, obviously I went to a secondary school in the middle of nowhere. Also, my mum moved me to a school that was out of the borough. Yep. So I did go to a school that was predominantly white. And obviously I wouldn't say I had trouble with that, but it wasn't. I didn't go to school that long ago, so it wasn't like in the 1970s. It was in the 1990s. So I kind of think things would be at least a little bit moved on from them. But there were issues for me there, and obviously as a black male, it's that side of things. I was definitely keen on giving that demographic of voice as well, because sometimes things can be quite marginalized in terms of how black men are represented. It's often represented in stereotypes, whether it be the gang related stuff or just whatever that we see on television, for example. So, but then what I didn't want to do is create another stereotype for that demographic, which is highly emotional, not being able to control, which I wouldn't say that's a black thing, that's more of a male thing. And so I obviously had to be careful about how I come across. So it isn't very heavy on the race side of things, but there are elements in there where he does go through some things, but it's just to give another, look at like an onion, another layer to things that are happening.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Gil from the Mind Buzz podcast. Today's mind culture and social podcast. And you're listening to Pods Like Us.
I mean, I was a school kid, so I went away to a school in the early 80s. And at that school there, that was, I mean, I am a white guy, as everybody knows, but so I went there, and that was predominantly white kids or white boys, but then So the school opened in the early 1981. I'm giving my age away here. So I was 10 years old. And then towards the end of the end of that year, after the summer holidays, another bunch of kids started coming in. And one of those kids was a lad of colour named Robert Peart.
Okay.
And it was really awful because I think there was sort of like, because we're all different ages and whatever. And I almost, as things moved on, I almost found myself trying to be more protective of certain kids in the school because
Sure.
they'd be looked down upon, or they'd be. And I mean, Robert particularly I felt really awful for him because he had. He's still one of my best friends on Facebook. I'm still in touch with him a lot, and so
nice.
not only was he a lad of colour, a black kid, should we say? I still hate saying that phrase. I don't like using colour in any way whatsoever to differentiate people, to be honest. But he was also deaf as well.
Oh no, okay.
So he added to it as well, and then people would take the mickey out of the colour and out of the deafness as well. And I almost found myself having him in that protective bubble that I had these other kids who were being, people would have a go. Your older kids would have a go at, and I found myself almost in that clique there, where even though nobody actually initially had a go at me, I found myself being pushed that way because I wanted to make sure that they were okay, and I wanted to be their friends, because I found myself almost in a way leaning towards wanting to be their friends because they were being so,
I understand
attacked essentially.
Yeah, I understand that, and you did the right thing there, in my opinion. I said it's difficult with children to know what to do, because obviously we only really learn from obviously our parents and in the environment and what we're around. So, obviously I'm going to speak for myself. I'm sure if I'd had somebody like you when I was at school, it might have made things a little bit easier. So I'm hopefully you appreciated it, but it's just little things like that sometimes. I'm sure those children didn't mean it, and if they did, well, but it's those things, although they may seem innocent at the time, as men we bury things sometimes, and some people have a way of being able to express themselves through art, of being able to get through those times, or other ways do it through substance abuse or drinking or whatever, but other ways it can manifest itself in other ways, and you don't really know when that happens until it happens. And it can be down to your mood, it can be down to your relationship with other people, it can be relationships with partners, but small things like name calling or whatever it can seem innocent at the time, but I said when it continues, it can chip away at people, and it can go towards creating a person that they may not necessarily have been had they not gone through that. But who's to ever know? But I'm just trying to say that sometimes for this particular character, sometimes the episodes that he's gone through may well be of his doing, but there were times where environment and people have influenced decisions.
Yeah, and before we go on to the other points that I've got in the list that I gave you, there's also the fact that sometimes I think the character can be a bit naive, shall we say, when he when he offers the light to the lady at the side of the road, shall we say?
Yes, of course, yes.
There's a bit of naivety there.
Yeah, of course. And because, again, without giving it away, sometimes you don't really know, because you expect the best of people. And I would like to say this character does. He wears his heart on his sleeve and expect everyone to be the same sort of thought process as him, which, as you say, is naive. Yeah. Sometimes you don't understand situations until you go through them, but do you need to always go through them in order to understand them? So it's, that particular person on the side of the road, I would challenge anybody to to recognize that as what it was when experienced it. But somebody might. But it was that one was very funny to me to write. Actually, I did enjoy writing that.
Yep. And without giving it away, I found the incident with the boyfriend coming to the ex-boyfriend coming to the ex-girlfriend's house and sitting there, and the character of Liam, the way that he was, I actually thought that was really funny.
Okay. I think we've all had situations. I mean, again, I can speak for myself, but we've all had situations where you like somebody and somebody else likes them, and there's that rivalry between you and that person. So I just kind of played on that, and just to see what it would be like if, without it getting too awkward, what it would be like if both were in the same, if both knew of each other but both were in the same vicinity as the other.
I will say, very lucky that the ex-boyfriend wasn't in the wrong mood, shall we say?
Yeah. Yes. Again, without giving too much away.
Absolutely. So, how do you actually record the show itself then?
So initially I started to record it using GarageBand or GarageBand. And I bought a really cheap microphone from Amazon. And what I was finding was there was a lot of, obviously, background noise at the time. In fact, I even moved house as a result of this podcast. I'll give you that story shortly. But yeah, background noise for me is something that I just can't fathom, because it just makes the podcast sound really subpar. So I used to live next. It was about half a year ago. I used to live next door to some very loud neighbours.
Yeah.
And I used to only be able to record at night time when they were asleep, which, as you can imagine, kind of ruined my sleeping pattern, because obviously I've worked the following day. So I didn't only move because of them, but it made moving easier to do. Obviously made the recording easier. Sorry. So yeah, I now record with a Shure MB7 microphone.
Oh yeah.
And that has made the quality of audio for me just top notch. I mean, I can't speak highly enough for the microphone. I did do some research on it, and this obviously was the one that stood out to me. And then I started to use Logic Pro X, which was actually very expensive. But just a tip for your listeners: if they do ever want to use it, they can use a free trial. I think you get 90 days, and then you just delete it and reinstall it, which is basically what I'm doing at the moment. So, yeah, that's what I use. So I use Logic Pro X and a Shure MB7 microphone. And then I decided to treat myself, or not treat myself, but because obviously the way of editing now slightly changed for me, I now bought myself a Mac to do all this on. So yeah, that's it. Okay. That's how I record. But the actual recording process, as I said earlier, it takes about, depending how long the episode is, it can take, if it's a long episode for an hour, it can take about 2 days. Because I then find that if I speak too much, I might get a bit tongue-tied or tired, or just need a break, and then I'll lose my focus on it, and I just need to just take a break for a day or so, and I'll come back to it. But the actual editing part is what takes the longest. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you've picked. I mean, eventually, once I've got the money, I'm hoping to get the exact same microphone, essentially. Or
so what do you use now?
I got a microphone that cost me about £60 or £70, I think, on Amazon, but it's got no control on it at all, which irritates me because my signal ends up being quite quiet.
Okay.
I can't do a thing about it. It irks me. But I mean, pardon? What's that?
What software do you use?
Software. I use a software called Reaper, I think it's called.
I've heard of Reaper.
To edit on.
Okay.
And but yeah, going back to the microphone, I mean, you can't go wrong with that because it's based on the old Shure. I sound like an audio geek here because I used to work in a recording studio, and so it's based on the same internally as the old SM57 and SM58 microphones by Shure. And there's a reason why, that has been the standard for vocal mics since the 1960s. And, that's because it's a really good mic, and that's why it just it's still used to this day.
Yeah, it is. It is a very good one. I think they've done well with the podcasting things now. I believe, obviously, without name dropping, I know Joe Rogan uses this mic and stuff like that. So it's a very good quality mic. I said if anybody wants to invest in, I'd definitely highly recommend it. It has brought my audio on leaps and bounds for doing so. So I can't speak highly about it. It's been a lifesaver, if I can use that phrase.
I just wish that I had Joe Rogan's production team.
Yeah, I think we all do, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we all do.
So you've mentioned, anyway, you don't need to go back to mentioning about the move, because you've just said why you've moved. And
yeah, no, I had some terrible neighbours, and they were just making, and you could even hear sometimes on some of the older recordings, but I had to do a very good job of editing them out. So I just didn't want to have just didn't want to have children being disciplined on my recording. So I just had to get those. I had to make a decision as to what I wanted to do. So I moved. So here we are.
It's as good a reason as any to move. I mean, but moving for a quieter place is a good reason, actually, I think.
And obviously, again, because it was during lockdown as well, and literally it was at the height of lockdown. Obviously, my home is obviously my safe space, and obviously where I spend much of my day. So the last thing I want to do is have to leave my place where I'm working and then try and spend time to have to then deal with unsociable neighbours. So yes, as you rightly said, some peace and quiet is needed sometimes.
But it was very difficult with the moving over lockdown, because we've actually moved while I've been doing this show.
Okay,
we've moved, and so. Yeah, you find that a lot of estate agents now, you're not even actually allowed to go to the actual premises to have a look around.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you get what's called a visual tour.
Yeah.
And you're going around and you try to imagine, and you think, now, how big is that room? Is it as big as I think it is, or is it not as big as I think it is? And it's almost like when you eventually go in and you move in, it's like a surprise when you get there.
Correct. Yeah, I've seen some virtual videos that I can't believe sometimes they're even out in some estate agents. Sometimes there's just clothes on the floor, and I've seen some videos. I have, but like I said, we had to make do of that. That period was a difficult period for everybody. It
was. Hopefully, we'll be out of that period soon.
I hope so.
So do I.
I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And we're from the Spy Hards podcast.
That's right, and you are listening to Pods Like Us, the podcast that also has the Midas touch.
So, what advice would you give to people starting a podcast?
I would say, if you've got any doubts about doing it, then just do it. I know it sounds quite out there, but like I said, I had my doubts about putting this out there because it is so personal in some respects. Mine's a bit of a different one to explain. Most podcasts I come across are conversational, and there is still a market for that. But I would say for other people, don't necessarily feel like you need to be like another podcast. Just do what feels best to you. It's if you enjoy doing it, then continue doing it, and just put your work out there. I would say also as well, try and get the equipment as best as you can to help with your recording. I spoke about the mic earlier, obviously very important. There are free software out there that you can use, so you're also having to take to pay for it. But what else would I recommend? I would say take your time as well. Don't feel like you need to rush what you put out there, and also try and stay consistent as well. I would say consistency is very key. Even if it's once a week, once every 2 weeks. I would say at the most once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. But even then, it might be a little bit much because you've got 3 weeks of people then not having any content from yours to look forward to. So I don't know about you, but I obviously found a lot of podcasts were started throughout the pandemic and haven't seen the pandemic through. So I would say definitely try and make sure that you have an idea of where you want to go. and try and be consistent with it as well.
Absolutely. So what other podcasts do you listen to?
I try not to listen to any other podcasts. That's not through me being obstinate. It's just when I'm in the creative space, I try not to listen to any other podcasts. However, when I do have some downtime outside of seasons, there's a podcast I listen to called Dating Will Be the Death of Me.
Yeah.
There's another one I listen to. Obviously, the Joe Budden podcast is one I listen to as well. Serial, I think everyone's listened to that. There are some sport podcasts. It's just things that are easy listening to for me. What I much as I want to, and I always want to support other podcasts, I just don't want to necessarily feel like I've been heavily influenced by what they put out there. So I try and keep myself in a bit of a creative bubble until such time I finish. So I have a list of things I need to catch up on. There's another podcast I listen to, which is it's called Show Me the Podcast, which is a movie review podcast. I believe they've now finished. Another one was, I think it was a horror podcast called Once Upon a Hill podcast, something like that. But yeah, there's a few out there. There are a few out there. But I said if I could listen to every single one of them, I would. But then I wouldn't get anything done. So
I'm trying.
Yeah. Have you got any others that you know are good for you that you can recommend?
I'm into all sorts of things. So I mean, I'm a bit of a comic book nerd, I suppose, or superhero nerd from childhood, from watching Spider-Man as a kid. So I will listen to a few of those, like Comic Book Nation. I like there's actually a really good independent comic book show that's called Comic Book Couples. Something about that. Comic Book Couples Counselling, I think it is, or something.
Okay.
And that's a really interesting take on it, because they take the comic books that have been released in the past, but they look at it from the point of view of the relationships that are in those comic books. So, like you've got the famous love triangle of Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey.
Jean Grey, yeah.
For instance, they'll go into that in detail, and they'll say, how that relationship would work in the real world, in a sense, as well. And
okay,
it's a different take. Because I think, in a way, much as I like shows that are a bit, professional, I also like the niche aspect of podcasting as well, where you'll pick that specific individual subject within the genre, essentially, that makes it more individualized to that person. Because I always say that no matter what taste you've got, there will be a podcast there for you if you look for it.
I agree.
But the shows that I mentioned to you earlier, I think it was before we started recording, you could actually probably get away with listening to the Bright sessions and Ars Paradoxica, because they are more, shall we say, science fiction-y in a sense, as opposed to realistic. So I wouldn't see those being, finding the way into your own writing, because they're so far, apart from it, unless suddenly Liam is, going to find out that he's got the ability to fly, or, X-ray vision.
Thank you for those. I will listen to those, and I think I'm definitely open to it. Reason being is that with every season, I'm trying to do something different, or trying to have a different spin on it. And obviously with podcasts, there's only so much I can really do in terms of, because obviously, sorry, just going back slightly, the music, for example, I didn't really use much music in the first season. It was more just as an outro piece, or maybe just as a filler. But now I've gone to the situation where, depending on the year that I believe it was set, the music that was in it is very key to that particular time. Or the lyrics of the song, although all the songs are instrumentals, the lyrics of the song lend to the situation at the time of what's being what's going on. So I'm now actually using more music, and I found that obviously as the seasons go on, I'm doing new things that I weren't doing earlier, and that's because obviously I'm having the confidence to try new things, but also there are some podcasts out there that have obviously given me some small ideas to run with there. So
Thank you for bringing that out, because I actually did forget that we discussed that before the show started recording. So it was supposed to be discussed during the show.
No, not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. Music is one of the music is, as much as what's going on in the show, I think music is, again, key to my heart, and obviously I understand it's very key to yours. Without music, I don't really know what I would do in my spare time. So it's not a music podcast, but it's definitely it definitely adds to the effects I'm trying to go for. But so I am being very particular on what music I play. I said it is time specific. I won't have anything in there that's newer than the actual time that's in there, because I'm trying to keep it as authentic as possible. But every song that's in there, I'm hoping that most people that listen to it will have some idea about what song it is.
Yeah.
And hopefully be able to, and hopefully harm it to themselves after the podcast is finished.
I think it all works perfectly. You know, the music, the way that you've placed that. I think that, like you said, it's a part of the show. It's almost like a character in itself.
Sure.
Much as the sounds as well, such as the keys. When you put the keys down on the table at the beginning of the show, and the sound of the engine and everything, I think that's. I think it's all part of it. In it, like I said, they're all characters in it. It's a bit like, you know, where people watch programs that are based in New York, and they'll say that New York is a character. All the sounds and every single thing. This, you know, when you mention about you know, being in you know, moving to from one place to another, and what about they all, even the places in your show, they're all characters. When you move from one school to another, it's all important to that story.
I used to listen to The Archers when I was younger. I just remember that now as something that's another inspiration of mine. And obviously they, like, I love radio plays, radio 4 plays. It's something I was very much I don't know if you remember years ago, there used to be a fun of a Spider-Man BBC Radio 4 radio play, and I usually just play like a set over and over again when I was younger, to the point where I knew all the words. So and even then, that was my first experience of not seeing something, but actually hearing the sounds around it, and that bringing the story to life. So I think, as again, stuff like that in The Archers, it's the narration's one thing, and I can direct people to one thing, but sometimes just that extra sound sometimes can give that more of an added depth to what's being said or what's being relayed. So initially, I had no intention of doing any sounds on it whatsoever. But again, as you say, sometimes accidents happen, and it can work out in your favor. And yeah, it is what it is.
It is. So, where can people find the show, and if you want them to contact you?
So the show is hosted on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Google, and Amazon Music podcasts.
Yep.
That's for under the Icarus Complex. If anyone wants to reach out to me, they can do. I'm on Instagram at the Icarus Complex Podcast. And I'm also on Twitter at Icarus __ complex, because some reason somebody already had Icarus _ complex. But Icarus _ complex is my Twitter handle.
So that's double_ for Twitter. That's why I've not found you.
Yeah. Somebody already had the other one, which is quite strange, but
yeah, that's very strange. I thought I was very lucky to find Pods Like Us. I hadn't been used on any network whatsoever.
It's a very good name for a show, by the way.
Thank you very much. Anyway, if you want to contact me, you can find me on Instagram. As I've just said, just Instagram and Twitter at Pods Like Us. If you do a search on Facebook for Pods Like Us, you'll find the show. And I've also got a website called the Marv Zone, which you can go to find show notes and anything else that I post up about, if you so wish. And you can contact me that way as well. But for now, thank you for speaking with me, Linden.
No problem at all. Thank you for your time, Marv. I do appreciate your time on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was
Thank you for having me
great
on.
chatting with you. And thank you to everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.